This morning I wanted to talk about phonics in reception, but obviously there's so much I could say, which is why I've started Phonics Lingo Bingo. So weekly I can drip some of the different terms and go back over them and stuff. So I'm trying to do quite a short session today to give you an overview of what it is, what they do, and then as the weeks go on, I'll focus on some of the skills and how you can support your children with those skills in more detail. So if your child went to nursery, they have already started doing phonics. They will have done phase one, and talk about that a little bit more in a minute. If they haven't been to nursery before, they've still been doing phonics with you since the day where they were born. You've been doing phonics with them right from the start, because phonics is all about hearing sounds and speech sounds from the beginning. And that's what phase one focuses on, listening skills, not about recognising letters. So they'll already go into school knowing all the sounds. They don't know what to do with them necessarily yet, but they already know those sounds just from speech. So if you've been having conversations, singing songs, doing nursery rhymes, if your child's been playing with vehicles and making a brum noise, they are doing phonics. That is what we need them to do for the skills that underpin what they're going to do to help them learn to read and write. So they've already started. They're already doing it. What we sometimes find is sometimes children struggle with some of those phonics skills that they're learning in reception, and they may have some gaps or bits that we can do more of in that phase, in phase one. Phase one doesn't stop at the end of nursery. We keep working on that throughout school, working on all their listening skills, playing around with language right throughout. So we're thinking about rhyming words, alliteration, and then we're coming on to something called blending and segmenting. And that's just when they play around with those sounds to do something with them to make some words. So I'm just going to grab this pack of cards here. That's my phase two word pack. And the ones I wanted to show you are these ones here. I've just got a cat joining me on my lap now. You coming up? I don't think it's very helpful for you to be on my lap for this bit, darling. In this pack, there are some picture cards, and on the other side of it is, so this is phase two, on the other side of it is more phase one. So what we want children just to be able to do is to orally blend. So this is a picture of a woman sitting down, so the word is sat. So if you were to say, not even with this card, but if you were to say a word to your child, sound it out, s-at. Can they put those sounds back together and tell you the word sat? So another one, this one is pat the dog. So if you were to say to your child, p-at, can they push it together to make pat? Now that's quite an abstract thing to do just in the middle of the day, so you can drop that into things like playing I Spy. So I can see a tree. Can they spot that you can see a tree? So those are the kind of skills that we want them to have before they start doing phonics. If they haven't got that yet and they're finding that tricky, that's not unusual and it's fine, and that's what we're going to work on as we go along. But that's kind of the first steps of phonics. And then the opposite side of that is, could they pull it apart? So if you said the word pat, could they tell you the three sounds? So could they tell you p-at? And that's called segmenting. We're pulling it apart. So that's the very first stages of phonics. But I just want to start by saying your child is in school and they're already on their phonics journey. Okay, so they already know what those sounds sound like. So what they're going to learn to do, we call the sounds phonemes. And a way to remember that is thinking about being on the telephone and you hear things. So a phoneme is the sound. What we're teaching them when they come to school, so I'm going to get this pack out now, this is my phase two school pack. What we're teaching them is how we can represent those sounds written down, because English is basically a code and we just want to help them crack that code so they can decode words to read them and then they can spell them. So what we're going to do, this is when we see it written down, that's called a grapheme. And the way I remember that is I remember being at school and drawing graphs. Grapheme is how we write the sound down. So now what we want children to do in reception is to think about those sounds they know that they use in speech and to learn how they look written down. And when we match the two, that's called a grapheme phoneme correspondence. Your child probably won't use that phase, but they probably will use phoneme, which is the sound, and grapheme, which is the written representation. Lots of people ask, should I start with letter names or letter sounds? And it's mixed what people do. I personally, in anything I've ever taught, in phase two, we focus on the sounds first, because that's what's going to support them with reading and writing, because they're thinking about blending what they hear to make a word. But you can introduce the letter names. That kind of comes more, they need that more when they're learning digraphs, which I'll talk about in a minute, in phase three. So phase two is where they start. Phase one is the nursery. So you could say, just like we've got the cats here, and I would teach my child this is called a cat, and its sound is meow. So you could do that with the letter. So you could say this is the letter S, that's its name, that's what we call it. And the sound that this is showing us is S. So you can do it that way, but focus on the sounds. If you're getting your child to say, oh, what's that? You want them to tell you it's a S, not its name, not an S. So we want them recognising, matching that sound to what it looks like, not the name to what it looks like at this stage. Some people on my Instagram have already said their children have come home and told them off because they're not pronouncing the sounds properly. So your child might come home and do that, because what we teach them at school is to use something called a pure sound. We want them to say the names without adding, this is something, when I was at school we did Letterland, and it was a, b, k, d, and it had that sound at the end. So what they'll do now in school is try and teach a really short version, they call it pure sound, where they don't add the at the end. And the reason for that is if you sounded out the word cat and you said k, a, t, if they push those sounds back together, they hear k, a, t, and that's not cat. If you try and make them short and you say k, a, t, and then you push those together, k, a, t, they can run the sounds, they can merge them much more easily to make cat. So when you're doing anything with them at home, try and keep those sounds quite short. For some letters it's easy, for some letters it's a little bit trickier. So like b is really hard, I've just there not to put the sound at the end. Some of you will really struggle to do it with, but just try and make them short, b, b, instead of b and p. So one trick I do to help me is if you whisper the sound, it reminds you to kind of just shorten it. So instead of saying p, if you kind of pretend you're burning out a candle and p, 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 you can hear the sound goes a little bit. So instead of p, we've got p. So just try and make them short if you can. The other thing with the sounds is you'll notice they don't start with A. We don't learn A, B, C. We don't learn it in the alphabetical order. But the reason for that is because if you taught A, B, C, D, then we can work on all the recognising the grapheme phoneme correspondence. We can teach them what they look like. But we can't get started straight away with teaching them to read words, because with A, B, C, there's not really any words you can teach them. However, if we teach them in this order, some schools may do a slightly different order. So these will be in the first 6 sounds they'll learn, and they tend to learn them at quite a quick pace. Many schools will teach a sound a day. Maybe Friday they'll do a recap and revisit. They do tend to go through them quite quickly, because every session, they do phonics every day, and every session they'll revisit all of these sounds. So they'll be working on them all the time to help remember them. So this is the order. And what we want to do, once they recognise some of those sounds, we want to start using them, and we want to teach them to blend. Now, blending is for reading, and they'll work on 3-letter words. They'll work on 2-letter words a little bit as well at the beginning, but mainly CVC words you'll be hearing them called. C just means consonant, so our blue letters, and red is vowels. So we're going to work on words that have a consonant, a vowel, and a consonant. So with SATPIN, we can already create so many words. We can create sat. We could change the vowel and we could put the I in. And now we've got sit. We could put a P at the beginning. So they might talk about initial sounds, middle sounds, and final sounds, because those early skills are getting them to hear, oh, if we change the beginning of the word, do we get a new word? So if we had sit before, and you can do this without looking if they're still working on that blending orally, you can say, right, if I've got sit and I change the first sound to a p, what's it going to be? It. Now we're going to have p, it. Now we've got pit. So that's blending. Segmenting, which they will do alongside, is just the opposite. So instead of pushing the sounds together, we're going to pull the sounds apart. Something I use for segmenting is a slinky. And the reason I do that is because it's really visual, because blending is pushing those sounds together. Segmenting is the opposite, so we're pulling those sounds apart. So if you started with the word sat, can they hear 3 sounds? S-at. So we're just pulling it apart. And the reason we want them to do that is because that will help them with writing and spelling. They may start with letter formation straight away at school. They might be using magnetic letters. Quite often they go to school and their fine motor and their handwriting, their pencil grip's not there yet, so they could use magnetic letters. But it's the skill of pulling it apart and being able to make those words. Okay, so that's what they will learn. And alongside that, they will also learn about high frequency words. So these are a set of words that are the most common words they will see when they're reading. And these ones here with a stripe, they will have some that are called decodable words. That means they can sound them out once they've learnt the sounds. So also when they're doing phonics, they will only be shown words with the letters they've learned, because we want them to feel like they can do it. So lots of schools this year and last year have bought new phonics schemes. There's been a big change in what phonics is like at school. Many years ago, people worked on the government's document letters and sounds, but now schools have been encouraged to buy schemes that have been validated and have books that match those schemes, so that what comes home with your child, they should be able to have a go at reading. If you haven't had reading books home, don't panic. It's very early in the year. Some schools might have sent them home. Some schools will send them home later in the term. You may also get wordless books home, and I'll share some information about that on my Instagram. So some books come home and they have no words in it all, and your child's going to say, oh, I thought I was learning to read. They're still really useful, and I'll share more about that. But when they do start to get words home, they should be made up of those letters in the order they're taught, and a mixture of high frequency words. So these, like I said, they can sound out. So we've got the word we've got an. There are some ones they class as high frequency words that I think are a bit confusing. So in this word here, actually when we say as, it sounds like a z. So we need to teach them that as is as, at. So these words here, like I say, all can be sounded out. That's just reminded me, when they're in phase 2, they will learn a couple of digraphs. Digraphs are where two letters work together. I've took them out. Two letters work together to make one sound. So sometimes in a word, they'll see two L's written next to each other, or they'll see two F's written next to each other. They don't have to sound each one out. So if they had the word huff, they don't say huh, f. They just say huh, f, huff. And you'll notice that these ones have a dot. A dot means one go. A line reminds them underneath the word, and it reminds them that they might work together to make a new sound or one sound. And when they go to phase 3, they will learn lots of digraphs where the two letters aren't making their own sounds. So the U and R this time are making an but you don't need to worry about that yet. So some of those words, like back, if we were to put sound buttons on that, we would put a dot under the B, a dot under the A, and then a line under the C and K, because it's b, a, k, back. They also will learn something called tricky words. Now, the word tricky, to me, I always wonder if it puts children off. So in my classroom, we always called them tricky for now words, because once we learn them, they're not tricky anymore. And they are, the words in phase 2 are the words the, I, to, no, go, and into. And they are the words that are most commonly going to be seen in those books that they're going to bring home. They're the ones that are used the most in the kind of books they're going to have. When you teach tricky words, they might be told you can't sound a tricky word out. Now, you can't sound a tricky word out with the sounds they've already learned, and they might break the rules they know, but tricky words can be sounded out. For example, the word the, we can hear the. This bit they'll learn in phase 3. They don't know it yet. This bit here is the tricky bit because it's not making the sound, the sound. So I've also put in my packs, so this one, for example, they'll learn t, but if they said ta, it's not the right word. So this part here, they can do that sound. This part here is the bit they might need help with, or they might need to learn this bit off by heart. So they don't need to recognise the whole word by sight, they just need to remember which is the tricky part. So that's one of the things they'll be working on in phase 2. It's lots about reading at the moment, not spelling those tricky words. So like I said, the books that'll come home should be decodable. They might have wordless books. Don't forget also to read your own books from home, reading books. It's still important, even though your child's learning to read to them, because you're modelling fluency, you're modelling enjoying reading, having fun with their books. So still read real books together, read recipe books, read whatever you can around the house that's reading for a purpose. Handwriting, like I say, they may start forming those letters straight away, because as soon as they can learn the formation, they're not getting into any bad habits. They might not start handwriting yet. Just the biggest thing I would say is don't be afraid of getting it wrong at home. Whatever you're doing to support your child is going to help them. So if you are worried about like the pure sounds and you don't quite say them right, you're still practicing all those skills and getting them to be comfortable and confident using all the letters and the phonics and things like that. Have a go. And what is my cat doing in the background? Yeah, and just try to enjoy it. Like phonics very fast paced at school, and they will do lots. The joy of reception is it's so play based, so they'll have lots of opportunities to apply their phonics in their surroundings. But I just wanted to kind of give an overview of what phase 2 is. Hopefully it's been helpful. Thanks for joining me.